Yorkshire, as you can see on the map, the entire area of Yorkshire is definitely the largest county in Britain, so large that it had to be divided. The symbol of this county is the white rose of York family. Sometimes it's called God's own county, especially by the people who live there. They believe it's so beautiful and attractive and rich in all kinds of resources. Definitely it is a very attractive area with a lot of interesting history going back to the Vikings and the Middle Ages and all the way to the Industrial Revolution and today. So let's look at those four parts, so four counties that constitute Yorkshire, and let's start with the biggest one, North Yorkshire, with quite a lot of interesting places. Of course, the main city is the city of York, with the great, beautiful and very large cathedral called York Minster, like Westminster. Minster was any kind of large church or cathedral, so Westminster in London is also this kind of West Cathedral, and York Minster is the York Cathedral. And if you remember anything about the Church of England, of course we have the Archbishop of Canterbury, and the second Archbishop is the Archbishop of York, and these are the only two archbishops in the Church of England. So this is a very important place historically, and even in this ecclesiastical sense. Some more important things here. Actually in York, or just next to York, there is the National Railway Museum devoted to the great history of the railways in Britain. I mentioned already there are some restored lines in Britain. So sometimes these engines and trains are allowed to travel, but the most valuable ones are held in the National Railway Museum. Among other things, they have a car that, a railway car, of course, not the motor car, that belonged to Queen Victoria. So that's one thing. What else? Some more interesting places. Scarborough, another coastal town which became one of the fashionable places for seaside holidays in the 19th century. Whitby, similarly, an old port that was given another let's say lease of life with the holiday makers. Whitby is especially famous for a mineral that is found there called jet. It's like black amber, it's fossilized wood. It became very popular in the 19th century for jewelry, especially when Queen Victoria became a widow and she only wore black jewelry. This would very often be made from Whitby jet. There are ruins of an old abbey on a hilltop, and actually here you can see a Victorian brooch with the image of the ruined Whitby Abbey on it. There is also a literary connection, very interesting, because Whitby was the place that inspired Bram Stoker to write his novel Dracula. So he was spending a holiday there, and it was apparently raining, so he spent most of the time in the local library. He found a book about some beliefs and superstitions of the Balkan nations, and this is how he got interested in vampires and this whole story this whole story started. If you remember the book or any of the films, most of the films have it, not all of them. Those who follow the book basically do. There is the moment when Count Dracula arrives in England by ship. So he basically kills all the crew members of the ship, and the ship is stranded on the shore, actually at Whitby. This is what happens there, and this is also based on a real event, because there was a shipwreck at some point, I guess in the 19th century. Bram Stoker got interested. Another thing, Studley Royal Park and Fountains Abbey, another beautiful ruined abbey. So we have quite a lot of historical monuments. These abbeys were basically destroyed during the Reformation, so they have been in ruins for a long time. If we move to West Yorkshire, we have the main city of Leeds, with this splendid neoclassical town hall. We have another model town called Saltaire, built by another industrialist called Titus Salt for the workers of his factory. So he built, again, not only the factory, but like an entire village or a small town to house the people working there. West Yorkshire is quite a mountainous area. We have the mountain range of the Pennines running through it, so there is a lot of beautiful landscape and beautiful moors and hills and mountains, not very high but quite picturesque. And one of the villages or small towns in this region is Haworth, situated among the moors. So this is the way it looks, with the hills and the moors and the heathers. And what is Haworth famous for? Of course, the Bronte sisters. This is where they lived. This is where their father was a minister, an Anglican clergyman. So they lived in the village, in the vicar's house, and now they are buried in the cemetery next to it, next to the church. And of course you can go there, you can walk the moors near Haworth, to the places that inspired the novels. And then another wonderful thing to do in Yorkshire. If we look at South Yorkshire, there will be two larger cities, Sheffield and Doncaster. Sheffield was one of those cities that developed greatly after the Industrial Revolution. This was the city famous for heavy industry, for iron and steel industry. Here you can see the town hall and the main square of this city. Quite interesting, especially for the industrial city, definitely. Doncaster, similarly, there is another claim to fame for Doncaster, namely the race course. So it has been a famous place for horse racing. The Pennines continue, and this is the place with perhaps most scenic beauty, called the Peak District and Peak District National Park. So that's what we have. Actually, Peak District is partially in South Yorkshire and partially in Derbyshire, so you'll see it in a little moment. The last part of Yorkshire is called East Riding of Yorkshire. The main city is Kingston upon Hull. So again, a city situated on a river, usually called just Hull. And this is again an industrial area with the Central Square and the Town Hall, and it's quite interesting. They have a very nice city museum, and they have this huge turn of the century monument to Queen Victoria on this large square, and beneath the monument, because it's so large, like beneath the pediment of the monument, there was the first public toilet. So of course everybody in Hull was making jokes that the Queen is on the toilet. So yeah, and again, quite a lot of nice nature walks, especially the hilly area called the Yorkshire Wolds. So the grassy hills there. We have a few more places to visit in the East Midlands. So this is the area that we are going to cover now, with the counties of Derbyshire, Leicestershire, Lincolnshire, Northamptonshire, Nottinghamshire and Rutland. So that's it, and Derbyshire is the next one, as you can see the location on the map, with the city of Derby, and I already mentioned that the Pennines and Peak District continue there. There are some interesting local minerals, like this one called Blue John stone, which is kind of white and red and violet mineral, quite similar to an amethyst, but a very peculiar, very specific to this area. The county was also one of the places where Industrial Revolution happened. One of the very first industrial areas, like the very first factories ever to be built in England, was in Derwent Valley. So here we have it, Derwent Valley Mills. When this building was first constructed in the 18th century, it was the first factory probably in the world, and a completely new kind of building, a new style of architecture, you might say. So shocking that actually people traveled to visit this place, and it became inspirational for artists. So it's not only the kind of doom and gloom and soot, but also the great fascination with progress, technology, industry. There are also some interesting historical houses, and definitely the most interesting is Chatsworth House in Derbyshire. Yes, one of the places we visited together, and this is the home of the Duke and Duchess of Devonshire. So if you remember, a few years ago there was the film with Keira Knightley, The Duchess. That's the Duchess, and that's the house she lived in. Apparently, it also inspired one of the great literary houses, that is Pemberley in Pride and Prejudice. So this is the kind of residence that Mr. Darcy was supposed to have. So there we go. Leicestershire in central England. The main city of Leicester. Another interesting place is the village of Bosworth, which is famous for the Battle of Bosworth, which ended the Wars of the Roses and introduced a new dynasty to the throne, namely the Tudors. So at the Battle of Bosworth, the last king of England to die on the battlefield, Richard III, was killed, and the new king, Henry VII, took the throne. I'm talking about Richard III because a few years ago, his body, his skeleton, was accidentally discovered at a car park in Leicester. Because after the battle, the body of the king was moved to the nearest city, which was Leicester, and buried in one of the churches there. So they didn't leave the body of the unfortunate king to rot on the battlefield. They took it to some church in Leicester. Over time, the church got demolished. It's no longer there. Some other buildings were constructed in this place, and apparently there was a car park, and they were doing some sort of maintenance work at the car park, when they discovered ruins or the foundations of the church. And yes, they managed to uncover the burial site of King Richard III. So a few years ago, he was reburied in Leicester Cathedral. So he's back there. And next one is Nottinghamshire, and if you look at the flag of Nottinghamshire, it tells you everything. Robin Hood. This is the Robin Hood county, and if you are using this Memrise application to learn the map, they actually use a bit of mnemotechnics there, and they said as a kind of memory aid that the shape of Nottinghamshire actually resembles a feather on the cap of Robin Hood. So even if you're not using the app, you can actually benefit from this. It looks like a feather on the hat. So yeah. So we have the familiar places of Nottingham and Sherwood, Nottingham Castle, lots of places connected to Robin Hood, the legends, the characters, the places where they were supposed to have their adventures, and even some burial sites of some friends of Robin Hood. There are some places of natural interest, for example, Creswell Crags, those rocky outcrops, quite a picturesque place as well. Next one we have here is Lincolnshire, with the main city of Lincoln, with this very characteristic large Gothic cathedral with 2 towers. The main area of this county is rather flat and marshy, so what we have are wetlands, are the areas with swamps and marshes and the kind of wet flatlands leading to the wash, this big bay, as you can see on the map. These marshy areas are usually known as the fens. So this is this kind of landscape, quite typical for eastern England. 2 more counties in this part of England: Northamptonshire, with Northampton relatively close to Greater London and the home counties, so we have quite a lot of beautiful houses and residences of the nobility, such as Althorp House here in the photograph. There are also lots of rural areas, or at least traditionally this was a very good agricultural area with lots of beautiful, typical English villages. So if you imagine a typical traditional Old English village from, I don't know, the Tudor period, the Stuart period, the 16th, 17th century, with the small stone-built houses. These are places usually around this area, places like, for example, the village of Rockingham. And the last county for today, the smallest one in Britain, except for Bristol perhaps, which also has a kind of county based on one city. It's called Rutland. The main city, the only city there, is Oakham, and they have a castle there with some kind of a local tradition. I've never been there, but read about it, and it sounds quite interesting. They have a local tradition of collecting horseshoes. They even have the horseshoe in the county emblem. So they apparently they collected horseshoes. So whoever visited, like, I don't know, some royals or nobility or other important people visited this county and this castle, they brought some decorative horseshoes with them as a souvenir for the owners of the castle, and now all those commemorative horseshoes are displayed in the castle. They also have a large artificial lake called Rutland Water, and this is everything that I know about Rutland. Never been there. It's quite small, perhaps I'll visit it one day. So we finish part 2 of the counties of England. We'll continue next week, and today I'd like to add something more, like a little extra thing, actually following on from last week and the place names. It kind of inspired me to talk a little bit more about different geographical terms that you can find on the map and in geography texts. So we continue in a moment.